G'day everyone. Before you can properly understand what administrative law is and why it's even a thing, we need to do a little bit of revision of some stuff you will have encountered in your introductory subject and also likely in constitutional law. It's not really revision though, because we're going to go a little deeper. We're going to be talking about the separation of powers. The starting point is pretty simple. Any power structure in any human context requires answers to three questions. First, how are the rules made? We call this legislative power. Second, how do those with power actually get stuff done? We call this executive or administrative power. Third, when there are disputes, who decides how those disputes turn out? We call this judicial power. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a government, a football club, a company, a family, a university, a law firm, or anything else. You're always going to be able to look at a power structure and ask those three questions. A second question always follows, and that is how much of that power ultimately resides in one person. If all the power resides in one person, then we have what you call an absolutist system. So imagine a family made up of mum and three kids. And let's say mum is pretty hardcore. She makes the rules. Things get done around the house because she hands out the tasks for anything she doesn't do herself. Whenever there's an argument, she settles it. And your chances of winning a dispute against her are pretty slim. That's an absolutist system. All the power is in one place. Back at the start of modern Britain, the system was absolutist. All power ultimately came from the king. Legislators, judges, generals, nobles, clerks, everybody ultimately answered to the king. And the king, according to the traditions of the time, answered only to God. The polar opposite of an absolutist system is a system of distributed power, where different people have different little pockets of power. So let's imagine a different family where everyone has a say in making the rules because the house rules are made by agreement. And let's imagine that when there are disputes, everyone in the family votes to resolve the dispute. And let's imagine that everyone is responsible for getting things done rather than individuals having specific chores to do. That's a distributed power system. In England, from the time of the Magna Carta in 1215, and then certainly from the time of the English Civil War in the mid-1600s, power became more distributed. The nobles demanded more power when they forced the king to sign the Magna Carta. And the whole Civil War came from the Parliament demanding that King James I be less absolutist in his approach to power. Now, if we're looking at a distributed system of power, there are two obvious questions. Who holds each type of power? And how do those power-holding people relate to one another? And there are dozens and dozens of different ways that the power might be distributed. One of those ways, one that you will have heard of before, is the doctrine of the separation of powers, formally expressed by the Baron de Montesquieu in his book The Spirit of the Laws. He said that the three types of power should reside in different institutions, which should not overlap. In his mind, absolutist power meant tyranny. He wrote, "There would be an end of everything, were the same man or the same body, whether of the nobles or of the people, to exercise those three powers, that of enacting laws, that of executing the public resolutions, and of trying the causes of individuals." So his method of distributing power was to separate the three estates entirely. And we see this model in some of the world's more prominent republics. So for instance, in the United States, the president is the head of the executive government. So he owns all the public servants and public service departments and the military and all of the other people who actually do stuff. But, and some of you might not know this, the president doesn't even have a seat in Congress, the American Parliament. If the president wants to talk to the Congress, he needs to be invited. Why? Because he leads the executive And the Congress, which makes laws, is the legislature, and they're kept separate. Australia doesn't have the separation of powers. We do have an independent judiciary, but in Australia we follow the British system, which is called responsible government. Under responsible government, you have one person, the Prime Minister, who leads the whole executive. So the Prime Minister leads a bunch of ministers, and each of those ministers leads a public service department. But the Prime Minister and all the ministers must also be members of the Parliament. They must be. You can't actually be a minister for more than a very brief period of time unless you get a seat in Parliament. So instead of keeping the executive and the legislature separate, in Australia they are intertwined. To stop the Prime Minister having too much power, we have other mechanisms known as accountability mechanisms. The most well-known of these is question time. Many of you will have seen bits of question time on the news, or you might have watched on TV or online. And you will have probably been completely appalled at the childish behaviour of some of our members of Parliament, who sometimes don't seem to realise they're in the Parliament, not at a football match. But question time has a serious purpose too. You see, any minister can be asked any question by any member of Parliament about any topic within their responsibilities. So they're accountable. Then 3 times a year in the Senate, they have a thing called Senate estimates. Boring title, fascinating process. Ministers and senior public servants spend hours and hours and hours in committee rooms being grilled by senators, government senators, opposition senators, minor party senators, all grilling them about how they're performing their responsibilities. The questions can be about big issues of policy, or they can be about individual decisions and programs. And the public servants have to answer. So these are 2 great ways in which the executive government, the ministers and the public servants, can be made accountable for the way they exercise power. And those methods are all very well if you're one of the 250 or so people with a seat in Parliament. But what about the other 27 million of us? Well, for us, there's administrative law. You see, administrative law is the process by which we as individuals can challenge executive government decisions about our lives. It's the process by which we can force government decision makers to follow the rules. It's the process by which we as individuals can make the government accountable to us for the decisions that it makes. So this is the starting point for our journey into administrative law. There are 3 estates of government: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The role of the executive is to carry the law out by doing everything from collecting taxes to issuing driver's licenses to running schools to fighting wars. The executive, which includes the ministers and the public servants, spends billions of dollars and makes millions of decisions. The executive is held accountable by parliamentary processes like question time and Senate estimates. But at a micro level, at an individual level, the executive is held accountable by administrative law. Administrative law gives individuals power against the government to offset the power that governments have over individuals. Let's learn more in video 4.